Tonight at 10, there'll be a new Prime Minister in Downing Street by the 5th of September. It's already a crowded field with 11 potential candidates. The first round of voting will be on Wednesday.
Okay, good morning. Good morning.
As the Prime Minister carries on with his duties, a colleague warns that the Conservatives face electoral oblivion, as they did in the 1990s, if they don't change their ways.
This is a wake up and smell the coffee moment. Sleaze, scandal, internal warfare. We've seen this movie before and we know how it ends.
Yes, we'll have the latest on the lineup and the way that most are pledging tax cuts if they win. Also on the programme. A week of very high temperatures ahead for much of the UK as the Met Office issues an extreme weather warning for the weekend. Train drivers at 8 rail companies have voted overwhelmingly to go on strike in their dispute over pay.
And coming up in the sport on the BBC News Channel, a 5-star performance from England. It's a 5-wicket win as they dominate South Africa in their first one-day international.
Welcome to BBC News at 10. It's official. The United Kingdom will have a new Prime Minister by the 5th of September, following an election to find a new leader of the Conservative Party. That process will begin tomorrow. So far, no fewer than 11 Conservative MPs have entered the fray, and each one will need to be backed by at least 20 colleagues to be on that first ballot on Wednesday. And then they'll need at least 30 votes to make it through to the second round on Thursday. And the contest should be down to 2 candidates by early next week. Now, one of the latest to enter is in fact Liz Truss. There she is, the Foreign Secretary. And like lots of the others, she's making rather bold promises to cut taxes. And that is widely seen as a dig at this man here, right on the left, Rishi Sunak, the former Chancellor, one of the favourites at this stage, by the way, because he was planning to raise taxes when he was Chancellor until he resigned abruptly last week. Now, our political editor, Chris Mason, is at Westminster tonight with the latest for us. Chris?
Huw, 8 weeks tonight, we will have a new Prime Minister. It could happen as soon as next week, because if either of the 2 final candidates were to drop out, the remaining candidate would become Prime Minister. But assuming that doesn't happen, there will be a contest amongst Conservative Party members around the country, with them voting later this month and in August. The contest then begins proper tomorrow. And on the eve of that today, a big battle about tax and a very crowded field.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
From Boris Johnson's resignation to the emerging cacophony of voices trying to replace him. Visions and videos, talks of their past and our future, promises and persuasion, and lots of it.
Is raising taxes during a cost of living crisis the right...
Mind you, this is all we saw of the former Chancellor today. Rishi Sunak published his launch video on Friday and currently has more publicly declared support from Tory MPs than anyone else. One of his biggest rivals is likely to be Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary.
Morning.
Who posted her launch video this morning.
To win the next election, we need to deliver, deliver and deliver for the British people.
Meanwhile, underground in the bunker of Churchill's war rooms in Westminster, 2 other wannabes seeking the spotlight. The current Chancellor made a big promise on tax.
As Prime Minister, I will cut the base rate of income tax to 19p in 2023, 18p in 2024. And that will give households back £900 a year on average.
One after another, candidates have been focusing on saying they'd cut taxes and criticising the former Chancellor Rishi Sunak for putting them up. He says he wants to cut them too, but only when it's responsible. Suella Braverman said tax cuts were needed immediately.
Don't vote for me because I'm a woman. Don't vote for me because I'm brown. Vote for me because I love this country and because I would do anything for it.
This is what trying to become Prime Minister looks like at this stage of the race. Events here, there and everywhere, yes, and those not seen as favourites at this stage making the loudest noises now while they can. The former Equalities Minister, Kemi Badenoch, has picked up the endorsement of Michael Gove, and while some have gone for a snazzy launch video, others have opted for the homemade approach.
I've decided to seek the nomination to be the leader of our party.
The former Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, is also standing, and he's worried about his party's future.
Sleaze, scandal, internal warfare. We've seen this movie before and we know how it ends.
Our leadership has to change.
And the others to already declare so far, Penny Mordaunt and Tom Tugendhat.
The experience I offer is not from Whitehall, it's from the real world. It's from Afghanistan and Iraq.
Communicate. The Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps.
I can help you win your seat.
And the runner-up last time is running again this time, Jeremy Hunt.
You might be able to see something.
They all want to replace this man, who'll soon be looking for another job.
But you need 6 months training.
I do. Look,
Boris Johnson's successor will be announced by Monday the 5th of September. The business of whittling down the wannabes begins tomorrow. Chris Mason, BBC News at Westminster.
Well, as we mentioned earlier, most of the candidates have been making bold pledges to cut taxes as part of their campaign to become Conservative leader and then Prime Minister. But with the public finances in a fragile state, some experts say that significant tax cuts are unwise and simply unaffordable. Our business editor Simon Jack is with me with his thoughts on the tax cut debate. Simon?
Thank you, Hugh. Yes, as you and Chris have been saying, tax and spending is emerging as perhaps the key battleground in this leadership contest. And it's a fact that after recent policy decisions by this government, the tax burden is on track to be the highest as a percentage of our national income in 70 years. Now, that's partly to pay back emergency COVID measures like furlough scheme, but mainly because an ageing and longer living population has seen demands for things like spending on the NHS, social care and pensions rise over time. Now, almost all the candidates are calling for tax cuts of one sort or another, either reversing the recent national insurance increase, cancelling a planned increase in tax on business profits, cutting income tax or VAT and others. But former Chancellor Rishi Sunak, however, says the country can't afford to cut taxes just yet. We need to get inflation under control first. But as the Chancellor, of course, he promised an income tax cut in 2024. On current forecasts, there is some headroom, some spare money, about £30 billion to cut taxes, but that number is uncertain and could be offset by higher things like originally expected public sector pay rises. Now, ultimately, tax cuts can really only be funded by doing one of two things. You can borrow more money or you can cut spending. It's worth remembering that this government made an election promise in 2019 to stop borrowing to spend by the middle of this decade, only spend what it receives in tax. So either you break that promise or you start cutting spending on public services. And there's another dimension to this, inflation. There are concerns, like Rishi Sunak has, that if you go too far on a tax-cutting spree, the extra money in people's pockets would fan the flames of inflation. Look at it rocketing there. That is most people's number one concern. But others think that any extra money will be swallowed up by ever higher energy bills. There will be no corresponding spending spree pushing up that inflation. In fact, just this afternoon, the regulator Ofgem warned their original estimate that bills could hit £2,800 per year from October was now clearly too low, their words. Now, a key weapon in the fight to cut debt and raise living standards is economic growth. Some economists say you won't kickstart the economy without tax cuts. Others say you can't afford the tax cuts until you kickstart the economy. And that chicken and egg argument, Hugh, will be at the very heart of this leadership contest.
Indeed. Simon, many thanks again. Simon Jack, our business editor, with his thoughts there on the tax debate. Well, the growing list of candidates for Conservative leader has been greeted with a mix of mockery and anger by Labour. The leader, Sir Keir Starmer, said it was pure hypocrisy for cabinet ministers to propose a reversal of the very tax increases that they had approved. He said the contest so far amounted to an arms race of fantasy economics. Our political correspondent Alex Forsyth reports now from Gateshead.
Our next Labour Prime Minister, Keir Starmer.
Waiting in the wings, someone else vying for the top job. Today, the Labour leader set out his vision for government, pushing his party's economic credentials with a focus on growth.
Only Labour can reboot our economy and end the cost of living crisis. Only Labour can revitalise our public services and re-energise our communities. Only Labour can unite the country and clean up politics. These three tasks will define my government.
There was a swipe too at the Tory contenders who've promised tax cuts without spelling out the funding. Trouble is, Labour's tax policy isn't entirely clear.
On national insurance contributions, you said you wouldn't support them.
But
would you reverse them?
We voted against them. We said that they were the wrong tax at the wrong time.
But would you reverse them?
As we get to the election, we'll set out our full position, but we don't know any more than anybody else does what precise state the economy will be in. So we'll set that out. I'm not going to write the Labour Party manifesto here in this interview.
You've called for an election now. Isn't it time that people know where you stand on tax, on national insurance, on income tax, on VAT? Where do you stand as a party?
I want a fair tax system. I want one which reduces the burden on working people. I want all forms of income to be taxed fairly, and that includes income that comes from property portfolios, from stocks and shares as well. All of that will be set out.
It seems you're happy to criticise the Conservative candidates for their tax plans without being specific about your own.
Well, I'm not making wild fantasy
but you're not
commitments
telling
on
people
spending.
specifically what Labour would do, what tax would look like for an individual under Labour or a business.
I'm not the one putting wild spending commitments out there without explaining where the money's coming from. I'm putting out costed commitments and explaining where the money comes from.
Sir Keir Starmer's often defined himself against Boris Johnson. Today he talked about integrity and honesty. But his political opponent's about to change. So there's more onus on the Labour leader to set out not just what he stands for, but what he'd do in government.
I don't feel like they're really coming up with any kind of policies or any kind of counterance to the current government with the Conservatives. So I feel like Keir's just kind of like sitting on the fence a lot.
I think he's all right.
Just all right?
Yeah. It would be a good thing for him to win, really.
Well, I've always been a Labour man, you know, and hopefully he turns the country round if he gets in.
That is what he's promising. Of course, he does need to get in first. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Gateshead.
Well, now let's go back to Chris Mason, our political editor at Westminster. Let's just recap on the events of the day then, Chris. And of course, we now have this rather crowded field for the Conservative leadership. How is that race shaping up for you?
As things stand, I think tonight, Huw, there is a focus on Rishi Sunak. We've seen that today with lots of challenges from his rivals on his record around tax. Now, when you look at the state of nominations, as things stand, publicly declared support for the candidates, Rishi Sunak is out in front. Also there, Penny Mordaunt, Tom Tugendhat and Liz Truss. But the focus has been on Mr Sunak because of his record as Chancellor and a concern from some of his rivals that, frankly, the government under Boris Johnson has not been conservative enough with taxing and spending at the kind of levels that Simon was telling us about a couple of minutes ago. Tomorrow, we will hear a response from Rishi Sunak, and he is going to double down on this claim that lots of the other candidates are talking about fairy tales, as he describes them, and instead responsibility for him, he says, is a key Conservative attribute. What we're going to get tomorrow is a real sense of Rishi Sunak's mettle. He is going to be tested for the first time, facing lots of pressure from his rivals, gunning for his record as Chancellor. He'll say he is proud of it, but it also sounds like he'll be quite defensive of it because he's very conscious that those around him trying to beat him are playing out that record over and over again. And all of this just on day one.
Indeed, Chris. Many thanks, Chris Mason, there, our political editor. And just a quick reminder, lots of updates, news and analysis on BBC News Online. All the links there for you, just for you to have a look and follow where you want to go in terms of policy and debate, including blogs from Chris and other colleagues. And of course, you can use the BBC News app as well. Let's move on then to some of the day's other news. Now, the week ahead will bring very high temperatures in parts of the UK, and the Met Office has issued an extreme weather warning for next weekend. Today, temperatures reached 32 degrees in some parts, with southern England the worst affected region. And today, health heat alerts were issued across the south, the Midlands, the eastern parts of England. No alerts issued in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland today. People have been advised to stay indoors where possible and to drink plenty of water. As our climate editor Justin Rowlatt reports, this type of extreme weather is likely to become more familiar in future.
In case you haven't noticed, it is hot. Very hot. Wales recorded its hottest day of the year, 28.6 Celsius in Flintshire.
Go, go, go.
And temperatures soared in England too. Lovely if you can get to the beach or to a pool, but the truth is most of us can't.
Do you mind if I put a hat on you, my lovely? The sun's very hot.
At Summercourt Care Home in Teignmouth, they've been making sure their residents stay nice and cool.
Love it. We're so lucky, aren't we?
Yeah, yeah.
We haven't seen this for years.
I don't like it that hot. But on the other hand, I don't like it too cold either.
If you also found today uncomfortable, be warned, it is set to get a whole lot hotter this week. And it's because of the southerly wind. It absorbs heat over Africa and then blasts up through Spain and France and into the UK. There is a very small chance we could see temperatures of over 40 degrees Celsius on the weekend.
Heat health alerts are in place across much of England throughout this week. We've got level 2 and level 3 alerts in place. This is to basically alert health carers that the weather is going to be extreme. Particularly temperatures are going to be high by day and by night, and this can have serious health impacts.
And those on the health front line are already feeling the heat. This afternoon, the NHS Trust running this major hospital in Portsmouth declared a critical incident, in part caused by the prolonged high temperatures this week. It said it could only accept critically ill patients. Other patients, it said, would be redirected elsewhere. It is yet another example of the kind of impacts we can expect from the sort of extreme weather the UK is experiencing. Don't think you can skip off on holiday to escape the heat wave. It was over 40 Celsius in parts of Spain today, and the forecast is France, Germany and Italy will also record temperatures of 40 degrees plus over the weekend. So stay hydrated and stay in the shade. Justin Rowlatt, BBC News.
Just a quick note that you might want to stay with us right to the end of the programme, because we'll have a full weather forecast with Darren just before we go. So a big update on what we can expect for the rest of this week. That's a bit later on. Now, train drivers working for 8 rail companies have voted to go on strike, raising the prospect of further travel disruption. Members of the drivers' union ASLEF are in a dispute over pay. Dates of the proposed strike action have not yet been announced, but unions must give 14 days notice. Let's join our business correspondent, Carrie Davis, who's at King's Cross Station in London. I mentioned dates hadn't been announced, Carrie, but obviously lots of viewers will be keen to know roughly what we're talking about here in terms of timescale.
Well, Huw, as you say, it takes 2 weeks, so the unions would have to give 2 weeks' notice. It won't be happening in the next 2 weeks, but we don't know when the union, or if the union, will decide to take strike action. Of course, this seems to be the summer of discontent, what has been dubbed that, continuing with the train drivers deciding to vote to strike. Now, what the viewers will also want to know is exactly who's involved. Now, we know that Chiltern, GWR, LNER, London Overground, Northern, South Eastern, TransPennine and the West Midlands were all of those who were involved in this vote today. The DfT have said that they are disappointed. They've urged the union bosses to change their minds. It is, of course, possible that this strike could be averted by some further forms of discussion. But at the moment, we've spoken to ASLEF, and they told me earlier that they think that these strikes are likely. However, earlier on today, there was also one dispute that was solved. In Scotland, there has been a reduced train timetable because of a pay dispute. But today, ASLEF drivers for ScotRail said that they were accepting a 5% pay rise, and services there will start to get back to normal.
Carrie, many thanks again. Carrie Davis there, our correspondent at King's Cross Station in London. Let's talk now about the very serious crisis in Sri Lanka, because protesters occupying the presidential palace say that they will not leave until Gotabaya Rajapaksa resigns. He fled his home at the weekend as tens of thousands of people descended on the area. Look at the economy and see how bad the signs are, because it'll underline for you exactly what's going on. Inflation currently running at over 50%. It's hit 54.6 on the latest chart. Petrol prices, just another symptom, up by over 60% in the last few months. And there is a serious shortage of fuel as Sri Lanka can't afford really to import enough because its foreign currency reserves have all but run out. And talking about currency, well, that speaks for itself, doesn't it, really? The currency has been devalued by over 40% against the US dollar. So what is there to say? Well, the country is looking for a bailout loan now from the International Monetary Fund. But first, of course, before that can be granted, it needs a stable government. Our correspondent Rajini Vaidyanathan reports now from the capital, Colombo.
Open to the public, reads the graffiti, scrawled outside the Prime Minister's official residence. In Colombo, the occupation continues. Police powerless as the people's movement picks up pace.
Well, things feel very different here to what they were a week ago when I was in the city, when you had armed police guarding the entrance to the Prime Minister's official residence. And now, as you look around, it feels like I'm in a public park. Families here for a day out.
As this nation tries to find a way out of an economic crisis, a moment to savour. The president they blame for their troubles expected to quit this week.
I'll feel better only after Wednesday, after the president walks out. You know, still there's this question mark, right? So I still have goosebumps, but I can't celebrate because he has to walk out. He has to go.
And what about the Prime Minister?
All of them have to go. We just need 15 good, honest politicians who will run this house, the parliament and the country.
President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has already fled his palace after it was stormed by protesters at the weekend. His whereabouts still unknown. Also in hiding, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, appearing in a televised address for the first time after his ancestral home was torched by protesters at the weekend.
This was your brother, the Prime Minister's house.
Yes.
And it's just a shell of a home now, isn't it?
We were shown around what's left of the family home by the youngest of the Wickremesinghe siblings.
I feel very sad. He is a man who did a lot for this country, and now if this kind of thing could happen, I feel very, very sad.
But back at the PM's official residence, they're happy. Crowds here hopeful that both the Prime Minister and President will soon step aside to make way for new leadership. Until that happens, they're staying put, continuing to make sure their voices are heard. Rajini Vaidyanathan, BBC News, Colombo.
The former boss of Formula One, Bernie Ecclestone, is to be charged with fraud by false representation over an alleged failure to declare overseas assets worth more than £400 million. Crown Prosecution Service said the move followed an investigation by HMRC. Let's get more details with our sports correspondent Laura Scott, who's joined me here in the studio. Laura, tell us a little more about Bernie Ecclestone, the man, and how this came about.
Well, Huw, just a reminder of who Bernie Ecclestone is. He was the head of Formula One for 40 years before being removed as its chief executive in 2017. Now 91, he was ranked 74th in the most recent Sunday Times Rich list with an estimated net worth of just under £2.5 billion. But today came a joint announcement from the CPS and HMRC that he will be charged with fraud by false representation, with a first court appearance due on the 22nd of August. HMRC said it had carried out a complex and worldwide criminal investigation into Ecclestone's tax affairs, which led to the CPS authorising this charge, which relates to an alleged failure to declare overseas assets worth more than £400 million. HMRC said no one suspected of tax fraud is beyond its reach. When contacted today by Reuters, Mr Ecclestone said he was yet to receive the details and so couldn't comment. This comes after he was arrested in May in Brazil for illegally carrying a gun while boarding a plane. He acknowledged owning the gun but said he wasn't aware it was in his luggage at the time. And then last month, he told ITV he would take a bullet for Russia's President Vladimir Putin, a comment for which he later apologised.
OK, Laura, many thanks for the background there. Laura Scott, our sports correspondent on the Bernie Ecclestone case. Now, a 15-year-old boy has been given a life sentence with a minimum of 13 years for the murder of the Liverpool schoolgirl Ava White. The 12-year-old died after being stabbed in the neck in the city centre last November. Our correspondent Danny Savage has this report.
Ava White was just 12 years old. She was murdered on a busy shopping street in Liverpool after a row over a Snapchat video. She was in the city centre for the Christmas lights switch on in November last year. The 14-year-old boy who stabbed her was in this group, caught on CCTV, running away from the scene. He was soon arrested. This is him being checked into a police station. Today he was sentenced to a minimum of 13 years in custody. That boy, who was now 15, wept this morning as he listened to Ava's mum read out the effect that her daughter's death has had on her life. She told the court, "I will never see her grow into an adult. I will never see her marry. I will never see her have children. She will never fulfill her dream of becoming an air hostess and travelling the world." We would talk about that for hours. This is the murder weapon the boy used. Police say today's sentencing should be a deterrent to young people tempted to carry a knife.
Nobody, especially young people, know how they're going to react in a situation of stress and trauma, and this verdict should tell young people that the consequences can be a life imprisonment.
That ripple effect of a single moment of violence has meant the killer's family has had to move out of Liverpool. Ava White's family say they will be broken forever. Danny Savage, BBC News, Liverpool.
Let's turn then to tonight's football news. And England have qualified for the Women's Euros quarter-finals with a record 8-0 victory over Norway. And earlier in the same group, Northern Ireland lost 2-0 to Austria, and they are now out of the tournament. Natalie Perks has the latest.
As the mercury rose, fortune in the fixture list brought England fans to the beach. All were convinced the Lionesses' dreams of progressing to the quarter-finals were about to take flight. Two-time winners Norway were supposed to provide a stern test, but when Ellen White felt the slightest of contact, Georgia Stanway, such was England's hustle, it was soon time for another. The offside flag was up, but VAR knew better. They were just couldn't take your eyes off this, neither did Beth Mead.
It's Mead! Oh, it's more!
And she wasn't done, just look at this solo run.
Still going, it's Mead! Oh, that is sensational!
The England fans who'd braved broken down trains. Earlier though, Northern Ireland's plan was unravelling. A dominant performance saw Austria wrap up a 2-0 win. That ended the dreams of the green and...
Right, well, the time is now just about 10:30 and Darren is here. Very happy with that football result, Darren.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to cheer you up a little bit, Huw. I can't take the heat away completely, but I can start with a picture of South Wales.
Oh, we like that.
And it's been the hottest day of the year so far in Wales. Temperatures have reached 29 degrees. In Cardiff, it was hotter than that across England, where we had temperatures up to 32 just to the west of London. That was today. This is tomorrow. And as you can see, temperatures are going to be a few degrees lower for many of us, but it's still very hot towards the southeast. Changes are coming down from the north, actually. We've got more cloud. We've got some rain affecting Scotland and Northern Ireland, but the heat is still in place ahead of it, so it's going to be an uncomfortable night for sleeping. These are the temperatures by the end of the night, so perhaps no lower than 17 or 18 degrees. Heading into tomorrow, though, there's going to be more cloud around. We've got this rain in Scotland, Northern Ireland. It peters out as it runs southwards. Sunshine then follows on behind. We could see a few showers coming into England and Wales. Many places still dry, but there will be more cloud. It's quite thin cloud, so hazy sunshine around. But the hot weather like today is really restricted to East Anglia and the southeast of England. Temperatures elsewhere are going to be a few degrees lower. Still warm, though, very warm through the Midlands and eastern England. Into Wednesday, we could see a few showers still lingering in the far south of England, 1 or 2 showers following into Scotland and Northern Ireland. Many places, though, dry, quite sunny, but those temperatures continuing to just ebb away a little bit. Still very warm in the southeast, mind you, temperatures 28, maybe even 29 degrees. So it's tending to cool off just a little bit through the rest of this week. And into the weekend, we keep in that cooler, fresher air for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but not so for England and Wales. And that's why we have this extreme heat warning from the Met Office for Sunday. It's likely to be extended into Monday. It is just for England and Wales, but there are over 50 million people within that warning area, and there will be some extreme temperatures on the way.
OK. Darren, thanks very much again. Darren Bett there with the weather for us, and that weather warning for later in the week. That's BBC News at 10 on Monday the 11th of July. Of course, there are more programmes giving you analysis and more details of the day's stories. Newsnight with my colleague Faisal there standing by on BBC Two with more analysis. And of course, here on BBC One, the news continues with all of my colleagues in the nations and regions standing by with the news where you are. But for now, from all of us on the 10 team, it's good night.